Why You Wouldn't Last a Day as a Medieval Peasant. This book, a whimsical yet earnest foray into the surprisingly complex lives of medieval peasants, is dedicated to the unsung heroes of history, the countless individuals who tilled the soil, endured hardship, and built the foundations of civilizations, often with little recognition. Their stories, too often overlooked in grand narratives of kings and queens, deserve to be heard, even if it's through the lens of a slightly irreverent historical lens. This work is a testament to their resilience, their ingenuity, and their quiet dignity in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. It's a celebration of their enduring human spirit, a spirit that persevered through famine, plague, war, and the daily grind of backbreaking labor. It's also a respectful nod to the countless historians and archaeologists who have painstakingly pieced together their fragmented lives from the meager remnants of the past. Their meticulous work has provided the bedrock upon which this more accessible exploration is built. To those who have spent years delving into dusty archives, meticulously analyzing archaeological digs, and passionately reconstructing the lives of those who lived centuries ago, your tireless dedication to unveiling the forgotten narratives of the past is deeply appreciated. Without your scholarship, this book would simply be a fantasy. I also dedicate this book to all those who find history dry, boring, or irrelevant. If I can convince just one person that the study of the past can be both enlightening and entertaining, then my work here will have been a success. For the medieval peasant was not a static figure entombed in a romanticized past. They were above all human, and their experiences, however harsh, were profoundly human experiences. Finally, this book is dedicated to the next generation of history enthusiasts, the young minds who will carry on the torch of historical inquiry, bringing new perspectives and insights to the study of the medieval world. May their explorations be as compelling and rewarding as the journey I have undertaken in writing this very book. May their understanding of the past inform a more just and empathetic future. Their work will be critical in filling the gaps and enriching the narrative that this small contribution to understanding attempts to provide. Chapter 1. A Day in the Life. The first hint of light, a pale gray smudge on the eastern horizon, barely pierced the gloom of Thomas's tiny room. He stirred, the rough-spun wool of his meager blanket offering little comfort against the chill that seeped from the wattle and daub walls of his family's hut. The air hung heavy with the dampness of the English countryside, the scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies a familiar, if not pleasant, aroma. A low groan escaped his lips as he stretched, his muscles already protesting the day's impending labor. He wasn't yet 20, but his body felt twice its age, burdened by years of backbreaking work in the Lord's fields. Sleep had offered little respite. The cramped space, shared with his parents and 3 younger siblings, provided minimal privacy, and the incessant rustling of rats within the walls had kept him in a state of restless unease. Outside, the sounds of the awakening village, a rooster's defiant crow, the bleating of sheep, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, were the unwelcome soundtrack to his dreams. This was not a romanticized dawn. This was the brutal awakening of a medieval peasant. His mother, already up, was stirring a meager breakfast of stale bread and water in a blackened pot over a sputtering fire. The bread, hard as a rock from days past, was the staple of their diet, its flavor more akin to sawdust than sustenance. There was no butter, no cheese, no honey. Only the rough, coarse bread and the water drawn from the village well, which, despite its questionable purity, was their only source of hydration. Even this simple meal was a luxury they could not afford every day. There were times, not so far in the past, when even this bread had been a rare treat, and the family had survived on whatever scraps they could find. Thomas ate quickly, his movements economical, his mind already dwelling on the work ahead. He pulled on his rough-spun tunic and trousers, clothes coarse and patched, a testament to their poverty. They offered little protection against the elements, and he shivered despite the exertion of dressing. There was no time for leisurely preparations. The sun's ascent dictated their schedule, and every minute was precious in the relentless struggle against hunger. The morning was cold, the dew clinging to the fields like a shroud. The air, though clearer now, carried the smell of rich earth and damp vegetation, a scent that held both the promise of a harvest and the constant reminder of the toil needed to achieve it. As Thomas walked towards the fields, he joined a silent stream of villagers, each carrying their simple tools: a wooden plow pulled by a single ox, hoes fashioned from hardened wood, sickles with blades dull from constant use. The Lord's fields stretched before them, vast and seemingly endless. The land, though fertile, was unforgiving, and its bounty was extracted only through relentless effort. The plowing was the most strenuous task, the heavy wooden plow cutting through the resistant soil with the ox pulling with its might. The effort required both strength and skill, and Thomas, despite his young age, possessed both. He guided the ox, coaxing it forward, feeling the strain on his arms and back, the ache of muscles pushed to their limits. The process was repetitive, each furrow cut across the field with the same slow, deliberate motion. The work was relentless, a physical endurance test. The sun, emerging with increasing vigor, beat down on them, adding a merciless layer of torment to their already arduous labor. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat and exertion, each deep breath pulling in the dry dust and exhausting him further. After the plowing came the sowing, a process almost as grueling. Thomas bent over, his back aching, scattering the seeds into the freshly turned soil, each movement a rhythmic repetition. He worked alongside his parents, their movements synchronized by years of shared hardship. They spoke little, their energy focused on the task at hand, their faces etched with lines born of exhaustion. Their words were infrequent, mainly instructions or sighs expressing their weariness. The work continued for hours. There were moments of shared fatigue, where they would look at each other in silent understanding, their bodies worn thin, their minds focused on completing the task before them. The monotony of the task was punctuated by the occasional encounter with a fellow villager, brief moments of camaraderie in a shared struggle. They shared complaints of aching backs, but mostly the silence spoke of their mutual understanding of what this life entailed. There were times when small accidents occurred, a twisted ankle, a cut from a dull sickle, or just the pain of muscles pulled too far. There were no breaks, except to drink some water and eat a couple of mouthfuls of the hard, dry bread that they kept wrapped in a coarse cloth tucked in their belts. There was a rhythm to the work, a pace set not by efficiency but by endurance. It was a life lived close to nature, governed by the seasons and the relentless demands of the earth. Throughout the morning there were no moments of respite, no relief from the backbreaking toil. There was no escape from the constant struggle for survival. This was simply the day-to-day reality for a young man living in a medieval village. The sun's steady climb towards its zenith served only as a grim reminder of the endless hours that still lay ahead before the briefest of respites. The heat was relentless, and the muscles in Thomas's legs and back were screaming in protest. Yet he pressed on, driven by the primal instinct to survive, a deep-rooted determination ingrained in generations of his forebears. The work and his family depended on his unrelenting effort. This was not a life of glory or adventure, but a relentless battle against the elements and the ever-present threat of hunger. And for Thomas, it was simply another day. The afternoon sun beat down with even greater ferocity. The sky, a cloudless expanse of brilliant blue, offered no respite from its relentless glare. Sweat streamed down Thomas's face, stinging his eyes and blurring his vision. The soil, now dry and dusty, clung to his skin, adding an uncomfortable grit to the already unbearable heat. The plowing, though completed, had left him aching, his muscles screaming in protest. The next task was sowing, a seemingly less strenuous job, but equally demanding in its own way. The seeds, a mix of barley, oats, and rye, the staples of their diet, were carefully measured out, each handful representing a small contribution to their survival. But even this process demanded unwavering focus and backbreaking labor. Bent double, Thomas moved slowly across the field, his hands scattering the seeds into the furrows, his movements rhythmic, mechanical, dictated by the constant strain on his body. He felt like an automaton, his body moving independently of his mind. His mother, alongside his father, worked with similar dedication, their stooped figures a testament to the years of toil etched into their bodies. The younger children were tasked with simpler duties, weeding out the sprouting weeds, a never-ending task that required constant vigilance. Their small hands, clumsy and inexperienced, worked tirelessly, but their efforts were crucial in ensuring a decent harvest. Their small figures seemed almost overwhelmed by the vastness of the field and the immensity of the task before them. They worked alongside the adults, their small contributions mirroring the vast efforts of the whole community. The tools they used were rudimentary, crafted from wood and iron, their effectiveness dependent entirely on human strength and persistence. The wooden plows were heavy and unwieldy, requiring considerable effort to navigate the uneven terrain. The sickles, used for harvesting, had blades dulled by constant use, demanding an extra measure of effort to cut through the stalks. Every tool was a testament to the sheer physicality of their existence, a reminder of the constant struggle against the limitations of their technology. The midday sun intensified the heat, turning the air thick and heavy. The lack of shade offered little protection. Thomas felt a burning sensation on his skin, a relentless reminder of the unforgiving nature of their environment. There were no breaks to speak of, only short moments of rest, filled with the swallowing of water, the coarse bread providing a minimal energy boost. These brief moments were filled with silent conversations between the family members, a silent acknowledgement of shared burdens. The women, often overlooked in historical accounts, were equally burdened by the relentless work in the fields. They shared the labor of plowing, sowing, and weeding, their contributions indistinguishable from those of the men. They were responsible not only for the work in the field, but also for all the household tasks, such as gathering firewood, fetching water, and cooking. Their lives were marked by a never-ending cycle of hard labor, punctuated by the birth and rearing of children. Their lives were less physically demanding than the men's, but involved ceaseless tasks of grinding grain, baking bread, preparing meals, making clothes, and attending to the myriad of needs of the family. The children, too, were not spared. From a young age, they were expected to contribute their share to the family's survival. They helped weed the fields, gathered firewood, and tended to the livestock. Even the smallest children had their tasks. The life of a medieval peasant child was far removed from idyllic imagery of childhood. The work continued throughout the afternoon. The sun, slowly inching towards the horizon, seemed to mock their exhaustion. The rhythm of their labor was relentless, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. Thomas's movements slowed, his body protesting the unending demands. Every muscle ached, each joint a source of pain. There were moments when he stumbled, his vision blurring, the world seeming to tilt and sway. Yet he pushed forward, driven by an innate survival instinct, a sense of duty to his family, and the sheer exhaustion that dulled any consideration for himself. The soil presented many challenges. Rocks and stones buried just beneath the surface hampered the plowing. Areas of particularly hard soil resisted the plow's efforts, requiring immense strength and skill to overcome. Unforeseen weather events, sudden showers, unexpectedly strong winds, or early frosts could wipe out the harvest, leading to famine. There were times when the sun was too relentless, turning the earth to dust and hindering the growth of the crops. And there were pests, insects, rodents, birds, all threatening to steal their hard-earned sustenance. These were all things that could not be overcome easily. The threat of injury was ever present. A single misstep could lead to a sprained ankle or a broken bone, rendering one incapable of work. A careless moment with a sickle could result in a deep cut, risking infection. There were no safety measures, no medical support. Injuries were dealt with as best as they could be, relying on home remedies and the resilience of the human body. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the fields, a weary sense of accomplishment settled over the village. The day's labor was nearing its end, but the exhaustion remained palpable. The villagers, their bodies worn down, began the slow trek back to the village, each step heavy with the weight of the day's work. The sunset, though beautiful, was a stark contrast to the harsh realities of their lives. The day ended not with a sense of peace, but rather an exhausted anticipation of the next day's relentless labor in the fields. The cycle of toil would begin anew, with the first hint of dawn. The lives of these peasants were not romanticized tales of medieval glory. This was the reality of survival in the Middle Ages, a never-ending, backbreaking struggle for existence. The midday sun, a molten orb in the bleached sky, beat down mercilessly. The air, thick with the scent of parched earth and sweat, hung heavy and still. The work in the fields had ceased, not out of choice, but from sheer exhaustion. The brief respite, however, offered little comfort. The meager midday meal was a stark reminder of their precarious existence. Thomas sat heavily on an overturned bucket, his body aching, his skin clammy with perspiration. His mother, her face etched with the lines of worry and hard work, ladled out a thin broth from a worn wooden bowl. It was a watery concoction, barely concealing a few limp vegetables and a scattering of barley, the remnants of last year's harvest, now thickened with time and lack of proper storage. The aroma, if it could be called that, was faint, a hint of something vaguely vegetal, mixed with the earthy scent of the soil itself. There was no meat, no spices, just a watery broth meant more to quench thirst than satisfy hunger. He spooned a mouthful into his mouth, the lukewarm liquid barely registering on his tongue. It offered no warmth, no sustenance, merely a thin, bland wash that did little to alleviate the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. The bread, hard as a stone, lay beside the bowl, a few chunks barely softened by the meager broth. The crust crumbled into rough, jagged fragments, each bite requiring a significant effort from his already weary jaw. Chewing was a laborious process, the dry bread grating against his gums and teeth. It was a far cry from the images that filled Thomas's dreams, the images of plump, juicy fruits, honeyed pastries, and rich meats, only glimpsed in fleeting moments during the harvest festival. His father, his face shaded by a worn hat, ate silently beside him, his movements slow and deliberate, as if conserving energy for the remaining hours of work. His younger siblings, their faces smudged with dirt, eagerly consumed their portions, their small hands clutching the bowls tightly. Even the youngest, barely able to sit upright, gnawed at a small piece of bread, their eyes wide and expectant. The scene was one of quiet desperation, a stark contrast to the vibrant images of plenty that were sometimes glimpsed in the distant towns. The conversation, if it could be called that, was sparse, punctuated by the sounds of chewing and swallowing. The unspoken anxieties hung heavy in the air, anxieties about the coming winter, about the possibility of a failed harvest, about the ever-present threat of hunger. They spoke in hushed tones, their words carefully chosen, each syllable carrying the weight of their shared predicament. "The barley looks thin this year, Thomas," his father murmured, his gaze drifting towards the field. His voice was low, a barely audible whisper carried on the hot breeze. "Aye, father," Thomas replied, his voice rough with exhaustion and thirst. It barely grew tall enough. He felt the familiar clenching of his stomach, an ominous warning of the lean times ahead. His father's words were a confirmation of his own fears. This year's harvest was less than last year's, barely enough to hold them through the winter. His mother sighed, a sound that carried the weight of years of worry and hardship. "We must make it last," she said, her voice firm despite the evident tremor in her hands. "We can't afford to waste anything." Her words, though simple, resonated with a deep wisdom forged in the crucible of their challenging life. This conversation was a ritual repeated almost daily, a solemn acknowledgement of their vulnerability. Their lives were governed not by grand narratives of heroism, but by the relentless pressures of survival. The seemingly trivial decision of how to ration their meager meals carried life-altering implications. It was a delicate balance between present consumption and future needs. Every bite, every crumb was a calculated risk, a gamble against the unpredictable future. The monotony of their diet was a constant reminder of their scarcity. Their food was an almost predictable succession of bread, thin broths, sometimes a few sparse vegetables depending on the season. In the spring, when the wild greens emerged, they added a touch of variety to their diet, the tender shoots providing a refreshing contrast to the relentless sameness. But that was a temporary relief. As summer faded, the options dwindled, and the anticipation of winter gnawed at their stomachs. The coming winter loomed large in their thoughts, a constant threat against which they battled. The thought of the long, cold months with their reduced sustenance sent shivers down Thomas's spine. They relied on preserving as much food as they could during the summer and autumn months, drying herbs, pickling vegetables, preserving fruits, but their capacity for preservation was limited. The storage methods were rudimentary, often resulting in spoilage, adding to the anxiety about food shortage. The winter was a brutal test of endurance, a time of increasing hardship and desperation. During that period, they would eat bread softened with water, the last remnants of the harvest. They learned to listen to their stomachs, their hunger a dull ache that never fully subsided. Their bodies, often weakened by malnutrition, were particularly susceptible to illness and disease, adding yet another layer of challenge to their precarious existence. Even the smallest injury could lead to long-term suffering and sometimes death. The scarcity of their meals was not merely a matter of limited variety. It was a constant, insidious threat to their health and well-being. The midday meal ended as abruptly as it began. The bowls were licked clean, every scrap of bread and every drop of broth consumed. The sense of satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by the stark reality of their hunger. The afternoon's work lay ahead, a demanding task that would require all their remaining strength. But they knew, with a certainty born of experience, that the fight for survival would continue, their lives dictated by the relentless rhythm of labor and the constant struggle against hunger. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the field, they rose, their bodies stiff and weary. The brief respite had offered little comfort. The gnawing hunger remained, a constant companion. Yet, there was a quiet strength in their determination, a stubborn resolve born from necessity. They were not mere victims of fate, but active participants in their own survival, their lives a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The midday meal had served not as a celebration of nourishment, but as a grim reminder of their precarious situation, a quiet acknowledgement of their constant struggle against a world unforgiving in its scarcity. The sun beat down, harsh and unforgiving, but they continued, their steps heavy but determined, their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the promise of another day's labor and another meager meal awaited. The cycle of toil would begin again. The midday respite, meager as it was, offered only a fleeting reprieve. The sun, now a blazing inferno in the cloudless sky, beat down with renewed ferocity. The air, thick with the scent of dust and sweat, shimmered with heat. Thomas, his muscles already screaming in protest, felt the familiar ache in his back as he rose from the overturned bucket. The afternoon's chores loomed before him, an endless procession of backbreaking tasks that stretched towards the horizon like an insurmountable mountain. First came the fences. Sections, weakened by the relentless summer sun and the gnawing teeth of winter, sagged precariously. Thomas's father, his face grim and set, handed him a coil of rough-hewn rope, its fibers coarse and stiff. The tools were simple: a heavy wooden mallet, a sharpened stake, and the rope itself testament to the ingenuity born of necessity. There was no delicate artistry here, no precision engineering, just brute force and endurance. He hammered the stakes into the hard-packed earth, his blows heavy and deliberate, each strike a testament to his strength and resolve. The rope, twisted and bound, served as a crude but effective binding agent, holding the weathered wooden posts together. He worked alongside his father, the rhythmic thud of the mallet and the creak of straining wood a constant soundtrack to their shared labor. The mending of the fences was an exercise in patience, requiring meticulous attention to detail. Each stake had to be driven straight and deep, ensuring the fence's stability against the elements. There was no room for error. A poorly placed stake could compromise the entire structure, leaving their precious livestock vulnerable to predators. The work was slow, laborious, and physically demanding, testing the limits of their stamina. The rhythmic thumping of the mallet was a counterpoint to the oppressive silence of the fields, punctuated only by the occasional sigh or grunt of exertion. The next task involved the gathering of firewood. The forest, a dark, shadowy expanse at the edge of their village, lay silent and still in the midday heat. Armed with a rusty axe and a sturdy rope, Thomas ventured into its depths, his movements cautious and deliberate. The trees, gnarled and twisted by time and weather, stood sentinel over the undergrowth, their branches heavy with leaves. The air, cooler and damper under the canopy, offered a momentary respite from the scorching sun, but the work was far from easy. Felling a tree, even a small one, required considerable strength and skill. The axe, heavy and blunt, required precise strikes to sever the wood. Each swing was a testament to his endurance, each blow a reminder of his relentless struggle. The selection of wood was crucial. Only dry, seasoned wood was suitable for their meager hearth. Green wood, damp and full of sap, would produce little heat and a choking smoke. Thomas carefully selected branches and smaller logs, examining them closely before making his cuts. Once felled, the branches were lopped into manageable lengths and then bound into bundles ready for transport back to the village. Carrying the bundles was a test of strength and stamina, the weight of the wood a constant burden. His sweat soaked his already dirt-stained shirt as he made his way back home, the forest falling silent behind him. The work was far from over. The evening chores continued with the care of their animals. Their few meager possessions represented the culmination of months of toil. A single cow, scrawny and thin, grazed in a small pasture, while a couple of scrawny chickens pecked listlessly at the sparse ground. The cow's milk, precious and scarce, was their only source of regular protein, each drop meticulously saved. Thomas carefully milked the cow, his movements gentle and practiced. The chickens were gathered, their eggs collected, their feathers meticulously inspected for any sign of sickness. The animals, like the humans, were survivors, lean, resilient, and accustomed to hardship. Their well-being was critical to the family's sustenance. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the fields, a sense of weary exhaustion settled over the village. The day's work was nearly done, but the relentless cycle of labor was far from over. Thomas, his body aching, his hands blistered, watched the sun dip below the horizon. The colors were breathtaking, a blaze of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the harsh realities of his day. Yet even as beauty momentarily stole the stage, the reality of another day looming large was inescapable. The communal exhaustion was palpable. The sighs of relief and low, quiet conversations were a testament to their shared struggle. They had endured another day. The evening meal awaited. Another sparse broth, another piece of hard bread, a meager reward for a day's relentless toil. But in the shared weariness there was a sense of fellowship. The resilience born from this shared struggle would see them through the long, hard winter ahead. The sun had set, casting long shadows, but the shadows held within them the hope of a shared survival. The unending chores, the unending toil, the unending struggle against a harsh reality. This was the life of a medieval peasant, and it was far from the romanticized version often imagined. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple, a spectacle utterly wasted on Thomas and his family. Their supper was as meager as their midday meal, a thin broth, barely seasoned, and a few pieces of stale bread, the remnants from yesterday's baking. They ate in silence, the clinking of wooden bowls the only sound in the cramped, dimly lit hut. The air hung heavy with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something indefinable and unpleasant, a mixture of damp earth and unwashed bodies. Their dwelling was little more than a collection of wattle and daub walls, covered haphazardly with a thatch roof that offered little protection from the elements. The single room served as a kitchen, bedroom, and living room all in one, a testament to the harsh realities of peasant life. A fire, barely smoldering in a stone hearth, cast dancing shadows that distorted the familiar shapes of the room, making it seem larger and more menacing than it was. A single, rough-hewn wooden table sat in the center, flanked by two equally rough stools. A straw pallet, barely concealing the uneven earth floor, served as their bed, offering little comfort. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dampness, a constant companion that clung to their clothes and their skin. Rats scurried in the shadows, their tiny claws clicking against the wooden floorboards, a familiar nighttime symphony. Fleas, a persistent nuisance, crawled unseen, their bites a constant irritant. Privacy was a luxury they could not afford. Their lives were lived out in the open, their most intimate moments shared with the entire family and the unseen creatures that shared their home. The flimsy construction of the walls offered little insulation. The wind whistled through the gaps in the thatch, carrying with it the whispers of the night. Their conversation, subdued and hushed, revolved around the harvest. The weather had been capricious, a cruel mistress swinging between scorching sun and sudden downpours. Concerns about the upcoming harvest, the lifeblood of their survival, dominated their hushed discussions. A poor harvest meant hunger, perhaps even starvation. The threat of illness or injury, always lurking in the shadows, was a constant companion. A simple cut could easily become infected, leading to debilitating illness or even death. Access to medical help was a fantasy. Their only recourse was herbal remedies and the healing powers of nature. Thomas listened to their anxieties, his heart heavy with a similar foreboding. The relentless cycle of labor, the constant struggle for survival, it weighed heavily on his young shoulders. The meager reward for their unceasing work was a bare minimum existence, a life spent on the very edge of survival. The future stretched before them, an uncertain and formidable landscape. The sounds of the night underscored the harshness of their existence. The wind rustling through the thatch, the occasional groan of the aging timbers of their home, the distant barking of dogs, the cries of the animals housed in the ramshackle outbuildings. As darkness deepened, the anxieties seemed to grow. They spoke of their neighbors, some of whom were less fortunate than themselves. One family had lost a child to sickness. Another's animals had fallen prey to disease. The stories of hardship and misfortune were recounted not with morbid fascination, but with an understanding of shared vulnerability. The shared stories reinforced their community, a community bonded by the hardships they faced together. There was comfort in this shared vulnerability, in the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. However, the comfort was fleeting. Fear was a constant guest within the peasants' walls. Thomas, tired and worn from the day's work, tried to find some semblance of rest on the straw pallet. The thin layer of straw did little to cushion the uneven earth beneath, and the cold seeping in from the gaps in the wall did nothing to offer warmth. He lay there, his body aching, his mind racing with worries about the future. Sleep came eventually, but it was a restless, fitful sleep, punctuated by nightmares and sudden awakenings. He dreamt of failing crops, of illness, and of the unrelenting cycle of toil that defined their existence. He dreamt of the unending sun beating down on the fields, of blisters on his hands, of exhaustion that permeated his very bones. The relentless, harsh reality of his life was never far from his consciousness, not even in his sleep. He woke several times during the night, startled by the sounds of the night and the feeling of cold air blowing on his skin. Each awakening served as a reminder of their precarious situation. The rats still scurried, their small claws scratching against the wooden floor. The wind howled through the cracks in the thatch. The animals, penned outside, made their own noises. The soft bleating of the sheep, the occasional low moo of the cow, and the uneasy clucking of the chickens. These sounds, which would pass unnoticed by most, were the soundtrack to Thomas's reality, the sounds of his life, and the life of every peasant around him. These sounds were an ever-present reminder that the cycle of toil would begin again with the sunrise. The coming of dawn was signaled not by a burst of bright sunlight, but a gradual lightening of the sky, a slow and tentative emergence from the night. There would be no respite, no pause in the cycle of work. The day would once again be filled with backbreaking labor, relentless struggles, and the ever-present awareness of hunger and illness. The hope of a good harvest was their only solace, a fragile flame flickering in the face of a constant, relentless wind. The simplicity of their lives belied the intense struggle for survival that characterized their existence, a life far removed from the idealized notions of medieval times. As the first streaks of gray light crept over the horizon, the cycle started again, quietly, imperceptibly, yet inexorably, pulling Thomas and his family back into the day's relentless toil. The sun rose, casting its light upon another day of hardship, another day in the life of a medieval peasant. Chapter 2. The Lord's Demands and the Church's Influence. The meager breakfast. A bit more of that thin broth, a sliver of cheese if they were lucky, barely fueled Thomas for the day's labor. The sun, a malevolent eye in the pale sky, already beat down mercilessly. He knew what awaited him, the endless toil in Lord Ashford's fields. This wasn't just any work, it was labor service, a cornerstone of the feudal system that bound him, his family, and their entire village to the Lord's will. The feudal contract wasn't a written agreement, signed and sealed with fancy wax. It was a tacit understanding, a brutal reality enforced by tradition, custom, and the Lord's unwavering power. In exchange for the protection, a rather dubious promise considering the constant threat of banditry and the Lord's own unpredictable moods, the peasants surrendered a significant portion of their lives. Their labor, their produce, their very existence were at the Lord's disposal. The most obvious obligation was the rent. A portion of their harvest, usually a third or even a half, was due to Lord Ashford. This wasn't a negotiable figure. It was a demand, and failure to meet it resulted in consequences ranging from fines to eviction. Even worse, imagine the sheer terror of losing the meager plot of land that provided your family's sustenance. A bad harvest, a disease affecting the crops, a sudden storm. Any of these could push a family into utter ruin, leaving them at the mercy of the Lord's compassion, a commodity rarely found in the feudal landscape. This wasn't abstract economics. It was a daily struggle for survival. Beyond the rent, there were the labor services, the corvées, that consumed a substantial part of the year. For a set number of days, often weeks, each peasant family was obliged to work on the Lord's domain, his personal lands. This wasn't skilled work. It was backbreaking physical labor. Planting, harvesting, weeding, repairing fences, building. The list was endless and the pace relentless. It wasn't uncommon for men, women, and even children to work from dawn until dusk, their bodies aching, their spirits crushed. Any respite was granted only when exhaustion made them incapable of further work. This relentless labor service depleted what little energy they had left after tilling their own meager plots of land. And it wasn't just the physical labor. There were countless other dues and obligations. The heriot, for example, meant surrendering the best beast of burden, a horse, an ox, or a cow, upon the death of the head of the household. This was a crippling blow, especially for families who relied heavily on their animals for their livelihood. The loss of a beast meant significant reduction in their farming capacity, adding further pressure on their already precarious situation. This financial blow often pushed families to the brink of destitution. Then there were the tolls and fees, levied on everything from the use of the Lord's mill to the right to sell produce at market. The Lord owned the mill, and everyone had to bring their grain there, regardless of whether they used it or not. The Lord's miller would then take his cut before the grain returned to the owner. These payments chipped away at their already scant earnings. Every transaction seemed to involve a fee, a constant reminder of their subservience. Even access to basic necessities became a form of financial obligation to the Lord. The system wasn't uniform. It varied depending on the Lord's personality, the region, and the specific agreement. Some lords were relatively lenient, accepting a smaller share of the harvest and requiring fewer labor services. Others were tyrannical, demanding the maximum permissible and often beyond, squeezing their peasants until they were barely surviving. Thomas, unfortunately, fell under the rule of one of the latter. Lord Ashford wasn't overtly cruel, at least not in the blatant ways some lords were. His cruelty was subtle, insidious, born from indifference rather than malice. He saw his peasants not as individuals, but as units of production, cogs in his feudal machine, their needs and concerns insignificant in comparison to his own comfort and enrichment. He had no empathy for their suffering, for the harsh realities of their existence, only the cold calculation of profit and power. The villagers often spoke of the old days, a time before Lord Ashford's ancestors seized control. They whispered of a time when the land was shared more equitably, when the burdens were lighter, when the harvests weren't burdened by such exorbitant demands. Their stories were filled with a mixture of longing and resentment. It provided solace as well as fuel for their silent resistance. It was a reminder of what they had lost, a potent seed of discontent, a yearning for a freedom that seemed utterly beyond reach. The vulnerability extended beyond economic exploitation. Peasants were at the mercy of the Lord's justice system, which was often arbitrary and cruel. There was little recourse against unjust accusations or unfair punishments. A simple dispute over land or a minor infraction could lead to severe penalties, including imprisonment, fines that could bankrupt a family, or even corporal punishment. The Lord held absolute power over their lives, and the peasants were powerless to challenge it. They knew it was futile to complain. This was not a nation with a constitution or a system of rights. The power imbalance was palpable, suffocating. Peasants had no voice, no representation. Their only recourse was obedience, a quiet acceptance of their fate, a grim resilience born out of necessity. They survived, not thrived. Their lives were a perpetual struggle against hunger, disease, and the overwhelming weight of feudal obligations. Beyond the immediate demands of the Lord, There were the unforeseen circumstances that could easily push a peasant family into utter ruin. A sudden illness in the family, a damaged cart, a failed crop because of unpredictable weather, these factors were the constant menace lurking around the corner, capable of wiping out any progress made. The slightest misfortune could easily mean the difference between survival and starvation. This is why the feudal system wasn't just a structure of economic exploitation. It was a framework that kept the peasant class permanently vulnerable and dependent on the Lord's whim. It fostered a deep-seated culture of fear, submission, and an acceptance of a life lived on the very edge of subsistence. The Lord might offer protection, but he just as easily stripped it away. The fear of such arbitrary actions fueled compliance and ensured the relentless continuation of the system. The cycle repeated itself year after year, generation after generation. The peasants toiled, the Lord reaped the rewards, and the system continued, a monument to unequal power and relentless oppression. The sun beat down on Thomas. Another day in the unending cycle of feudal labor, another day closer to the inevitable winter, and the ever-present fear of hunger, a constant reminder of his utter powerlessness. The setting sun cast long shadows across the fields, underscoring the inescapable reality of his existence. The only comfort he found was in the quiet solidarity of his community, their shared suffering somehow creating a bond stronger than the iron grip of the feudal system. Yet even that solace was fragile, always threatened by the whims of their lord and the cruel unpredictability of nature. The relentless cycle continued day after day, year after year, a silent testament to the harsh realities of medieval peasant life. But the demands on Thomas and his fellow villagers didn't end with Lord Ashford. Another layer of obligation, a seemingly inescapable burden, was imposed by the church. While the Lord claimed a significant portion of their harvest, the church, too, reached into their meager pockets, demanding its share through the system of tithes. This wasn't a simple donation. It was an obligatory payment. A tenth of their produce, grains, fruits, livestock, decreed by religious law. Refusal to pay the tithe was not an option. It was considered a grave sin, a transgression punishable not only by earthly consequences, but also the wrath of God. The concept of tithes was deeply ingrained in the medieval social structure. The church, a powerful institution with vast landholdings and influence, asserted its authority through this system, ensuring a steady stream of resources to maintain its elaborate infrastructure, support its clergy, and fund its ambitious building projects, like the magnificent cathedrals that still stand today as testaments to medieval faith and power. These grandiose cathedrals served not only as places of worship, but also as centers of power. The tithe, however, wasn't always a fixed, easily calculated sum. Its exact nature often depended on local customs, interpretations of religious law, and unfortunately, the greed or leniency of the local priest. While the official doctrine specified a tenth of the harvest, the reality was often more complex. Some priests were scrupulous in their assessment, sticking strictly to the prescribed amount. Others, however, were known to be far less lenient. Ambiguities in the interpretation of produce allowed for considerable latitude in their demands. Did it include only the surplus after the Lord's share was taken? Or did it encompass a tenth of the total harvest before the Lord's dues were even considered? The answers varied from village to village, priest to priest, causing considerable unrest and resentment among the already burdened peasants. Stories circulated, whispered from one village to another, about priests who manipulated the tithe system to their advantage. Tales of priests demanding a larger share under the guise of unforeseen church expenses or special collections were common. These abuses, often fueled by the priest's ambition or personal avarice, eroded the already fragile trust between the peasants and the church. The image of the church as a benevolent, caring institution was often challenged by the harsh realities of this seemingly unending demand for resources. Furthermore, the tithe wasn't restricted to the harvest. It extended to other aspects of peasant life. A portion of their livestock, especially the firstborn lambs or calves, was often expected. Honey from the beehives, eggs from the hens, even a portion of the cheese produced by the family, all fell under the purview of the tithe. The constant demand for resources placed considerable strain on the peasants' already meager means. A bad harvest, the death of a beast, or any unforeseen misfortune could make the tithe a crippling burden, pushing families further towards destitution. The church, however, offered more than just financial demands. It provided a range of services that influenced every facet of peasant life. Religious ceremonies, baptisms, weddings, funerals were integral to the community. These events weren't simply religious observances. They were social milestones, shaping the rhythm and fabric of daily life. The church provided the framework for these ceremonies, establishing the rituals and practices that provided structure, comfort, and meaning within the often harsh realities of medieval peasant existence. It served as a social center, offering support and guidance to the community. The church also played a vital role in education. Monasteries and convents became centers of learning, preserving ancient texts and providing education, albeit limited, to a select few. This education was not available to the average peasant child, as it was more often than not reserved for the sons of the clergy or nobility. However, the church did provide an essential literacy support network. The church offered spiritual comfort amidst physical hardship. In a world beset by disease, famine, and violence, religion provided solace, hope, and a sense of order. The promises of salvation and eternal life held a special allure for those who faced a short, arduous life filled with constant struggles for survival. The church's emphasis on charity and compassion, though sometimes contradicted by the realities of the tithe system, provided a counterpoint to the relentless demands of feudal lords. However, this spiritual comfort often came at a price. Religious festivals and holidays, while offering brief respites from labor, also involved additional expenses, which often meant sacrificing food and resources for religious observances and offerings. This further burdened the already strained household budgets, highlighting the complex interplay between spiritual devotion and material survival. The peasant's faith was a double-edged sword, a source of solace and hope, yet also a contributor to their financial burdens. The church's influence wasn't merely passive, it was actively woven into the fabric of the daily life. Church calendars dictated the rhythm of the year, influencing the timing of agricultural work and social gatherings. Religious holidays like Easter and Christmas marked significant breaks in the relentless cycle of labor, providing opportunities for respite and communal celebration. But these were often occasions demanding their own financial sacrifices, a reminder that even moments of celebration were entangled with material obligations. The pervasive presence of the church in every aspect of medieval life, combined with the constant material demands of the tithe system, created a complex relationship between religion and survival. The church provided both spiritual sustenance and a source of material hardship. For Thomas and his fellow villagers, the church represented a duality, a source of comfort, guidance, and hope, yet also a collector of the meager fruits of their labor. The spiritual and the material were inextricably linked, forever shaping the lives of the peasants and their experience of medieval society. The church, with its intricate web of religious beliefs and practices, exerted its power in various ways, impacting even the most mundane aspects of peasant life. The moral teachings, though often interpreted differently by different individuals, shaped their behavior and influenced their moral compass. The church often provided crucial social services such as dispute resolution and care for the poor and sick. The monasteries, despite their secluded nature, played significant roles in providing essential services to the communities around them, offering hospitality, healthcare, and education, though usually restricted to the clergy and noble-born individuals. This blend of spiritual guidance, social control, and material demands established the church's dominance in medieval society. The church was not just a religious institution, it was a powerful social and political force. Its reach extended into every corner of daily life, influencing not only individual beliefs and practices, but also communal structures and the very way society functioned. The peasants' relationship with the church was deeply complex. While they might find solace in its spiritual offerings, the material burdens imposed by the tithe system often generated resentment and suspicion. However, open rebellion was rare. The church's pervasive influence and the deeply embedded religious beliefs of the people created a sense of acceptance, albeit a reluctant one, of the tithe system. The peasants, often illiterate and lacking political power, had little choice but to accept the church's demands, even if it meant sacrificing a significant part of their already meager harvest. The church, in return, provided a sense of community, a shared identity, and a belief system that offered comfort in times of hardship. This complicated relationship, a delicate balance between acceptance and resentment, continued to characterize the lives of the medieval peasants, reinforcing their ingrained submission within this complex medieval social hierarchy. The tithe, therefore, wasn't merely a financial burden, it was a symbol of the church's power and the peasants' subservience. It reflected the prevailing social order where the church, like the Lord, exerted its authority over the lives of the people. It highlighted the inextricable link between spiritual belief and material existence in the medieval world, where faith and survival were often intertwined in a complex and often challenging relationship. But even the combined pressures of the Lord's demands and the church's tithe paled in comparison to the ever-present threat that hung over every medieval peasant: disease and death. Life expectancy was tragically short, a stark contrast to the romanticized notions often associated with the medieval period. Forget the gallant knights and noble dames. The reality for the vast majority was a brutal struggle for survival, constantly overshadowed by the specter of illness and premature demise. The lack of sanitation in medieval villages was a primary contributor to the high mortality rate. Imagine a world without running water, sewers, or garbage collection. Waste accumulated in the streets, attracting vermin and spreading disease. Homes were often cramped, poorly ventilated, and shared by multiple families, fostering the rapid spread of infection. Wells, the primary source of drinking water, were frequently contaminated, further fueling the cycle of illness. The most infamous of these diseases was, of course, the bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death. This devastating pandemic swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, wiping out an estimated 30 to 60% of the population. It arrived like a malevolent force, bringing with it death and chaos. The plague's rapid spread was facilitated by the very conditions of medieval life: the close proximity of humans to animals, the prevalence of rats carrying infected fleas, and the lack of hygiene created the perfect breeding ground for this deadly disease. Eyewitness accounts paint a grim picture of the plague's ravages. Entire villages were decimated, leaving behind only silence and death. Families were torn apart as one member after another succumbed to the disease. Bodies piled up in the streets, unburied and left to rot, further contaminating the already unhealthy environment. The stench of death permeated the air, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. The plague wasn't just a physical affliction, it was a psychological trauma. The constant fear of infection, the sight of suffering and death, and the feeling of helplessness in the face of such a powerful disease left an indelible mark on the survivors. Their lives were forever changed, marked by loss and a deep-seated anxiety about the ever-present threat of death. But the plague wasn't the only disease that plagued medieval peasants. Other infectious illnesses, such as dysentery, typhoid, cholera, and various forms of pneumonia, were common and often deadly. These diseases were typically spread through contaminated food and water, close contact with infected individuals, and poor sanitation. The symptoms were often severe, leading to debilitating weakness, high fever, and agonizing pain. Without access to proper medical care, many succumbed to these illnesses. The medical knowledge of the time was rudimentary at best. Doctors lacked an understanding of germ theory, and their treatments were often ineffective or even harmful. Bloodletting, a common practice, was believed to rid the body of evil humors, but often weakened patients further, leaving them vulnerable to infection and death. Herbal remedies were used, but their effectiveness varied greatly, and many were ineffective against bacterial or viral infections. The limited understanding of medicine and the lack of hygiene practices only served to exacerbate the suffering. The high mortality rate among infants and children was especially devastating. Malnutrition, lack of proper health care, and the prevalence of infectious diseases resulted in a high number of infant deaths. Mothers often experienced difficulty breastfeeding due to malnutrition, leading to further infant mortality. The harsh living conditions and poor sanitation took a huge toll on vulnerable young lives. Even those who survived childhood often fell victim to disease later in life. The constant exposure to infectious agents, malnutrition, and hard physical labor weakened the immune system, leaving individuals susceptible to illness. The combination of these factors often meant a short and arduous life for medieval peasants. The devastating impact of disease on medieval villages was not just limited to the immediate loss of life. The deaths of numerous villagers often had cascading effects on the community as a whole. Reduced labor capacity severely hampered agricultural production. The lack of skilled workers negatively affected daily life. The loss of family members frequently had devastating economic and emotional consequences. The emotional toll on families could be immense. The death of a loved one was a devastating event. Often, individuals would struggle to accept the death of a loved one, causing a sense of despair that would greatly affect their daily life. The death of parents could orphan children, leaving them vulnerable and at risk of starvation or exploitation. The loss of a spouse could leave individuals alone to struggle with the hardships of daily life. The constant threat of disease and death shaped every aspect of medieval peasant life. People lived with a profound awareness of their mortality. Their lives were lived on a knife's edge, with the ever-present threat of illness or death casting a long shadow over their daily existence. This awareness did not necessarily lead to despair, but it did shape their priorities and their outlook on life. Death was not just a distant possibility, it was an ever-present reality, intimately intertwined with their daily lives. This stark reality fueled a deep sense of community. People relied on each other for support, comfort, and assistance in times of hardship. Death rituals and funerary practices played a significant role in their culture, providing a means of coping with loss and maintaining a sense of community in the face of mortality. The constant presence of death served as a grim reminder of the brevity of human life. The constant struggle against disease and death further reinforced the social hierarchy. The wealthy, with their access to better food, cleaner living conditions, and some rudimentary medical care, often had a better chance of survival. Peasants, on the other hand, faced a constant battle against illness and premature demise, highlighting the profound inequalities that characterized medieval society. The medieval world was not just a time of chivalry and romance. It was also a world defined by disease, death, and the constant struggle for survival. For Thomas and his fellow villagers, the fight for survival went beyond the demands of their lord and the church. It was a daily battle against the relentless forces of nature and the ever-present threat of disease. The specter of death loomed large, shaping their lives, their beliefs, and their sense of community in profound and often devastating ways. Their lives, while seemingly simple from a distance, were filled with a complexity and a struggle for survival that is often overlooked in romanticized portrayals of the medieval era. The lack of medical knowledge, coupled with unsanitary conditions and malnutrition, created a society where survival was far from a given, and death was a constant companion. The relative peace of tending fields and paying tithes, however precarious, could shatter in an instant. The idyllic image of medieval life, often painted in romantic hues, is violently disrupted by the reality of warfare. For the peasant, war wasn't a grand spectacle of chivalry. It was a brutal interruption, a maelstrom that swept away their lives, their homes, and their livelihoods. While noblemen engaged in strategic maneuvering and glorious or gruesome battles, the peasants were caught in the crossfire, their existence reduced to mere collateral damage. Consider the 100 Years' War, a protracted conflict between England and France that spanned much of the 14th and 15th centuries. This wasn't a clash of armies alone, it was a war that bled into the very fabric of peasant life. Imagine a village, nestled peacefully in a fertile valley, suddenly engulfed in the chaos of war. One moment, the villagers toil in their fields, the rhythmic swing of scythes a testament to their routine. The next, the familiar sounds of nature are replaced by the terrifying blare of trumpets, the clash of steel, and the desperate cries of men. Armies, both English and French, marched across the countryside, leaving trails of devastation in their wake. Villages were ransacked, homes burned to the ground, and fields ravaged. The carefully cultivated crops, the peasants' only source of sustenance, were trampled underfoot, leaving families facing starvation. Livestock, crucial for both sustenance and income, were slaughtered or driven away, adding to the misery. The meticulous work of years, the very foundation of their existence, was reduced to ashes and rubble in a matter of days. The impact extended beyond the immediate destruction. The constant movement of troops, the requisitioning of supplies, and the imposition of war taxes placed an unbearable burden on the peasant population. Food became scarce, prices skyrocketed, and the threat of starvation loomed large. Disease, ever present in the medieval world, flourished in the wake of war, further compounding the suffering. The disruption of trade routes and the breakdown of social order created a breeding ground for epidemics, often claiming more lives than the battles themselves. Then there was the dreaded conscription. While noblemen could afford to hire mercenaries, peasants often faced the grim prospect of being forced into military service. Torn away from their families and their land, they were thrust into the horrors of war, often armed with nothing more than crude implements. Their lives were expendable, their experiences rendered insignificant in the grand narrative of the conflict. Imagine a young man, accustomed to the quiet rhythm of farm labor, suddenly thrust into the brutal realities of medieval warfare, the deafening noise, the stench of blood, the terror of close-quarters combat. His survival wasn't a matter of skill or strategy, but rather a roll of the dice, a capricious twist of fate. Many never returned home, leaving behind grieving families and empty fields. The contrast between the experiences of the nobility and the peasantry during wartime was stark. While knights and lords might revel in the glory or lament the loss of battle, their lives continued largely undisturbed. They held on to their lands and their titles, their estates serving as sanctuaries from the worst of the conflict. Peasants, however, bore the brunt of the war's devastation. Their existence was reduced to a struggle for survival amidst the chaos and ruin. The war left an indelible mark on their lives, a wound that took generations to heal. The impact of warfare extended beyond the immediate loss of life and property. It inflicted deep psychological scars on the peasant population. The trauma of witnessing violence, the constant fear of attack, and the disruption of their daily lives left a lasting legacy of anxiety and insecurity. The loss of loved ones, the destruction of homes, and the disruption of their communities left emotional wounds that never truly healed. The long-term consequences of warfare on the land were equally devastating. Years of conflict could leave the countryside scarred and depleted. Fields lay fallow, abandoned and overgrown with weeds. Livestock populations dwindled, and the soil, stripped of its fertility, yielded meager harvests. This had ripple effects for generations to come, perpetuating cycles of poverty and instability. The destruction of infrastructure, roads, bridges, and irrigation systems further hindered recovery and stifled economic growth. The repercussions of war lingered long after the battles had ended. The peasant experience during wartime serves as a brutal counterpoint to the romanticized narratives of medieval warfare. It reminds us that war is not a game played by kings and knights. It's a catastrophic event that inflicts immense suffering on ordinary people, particularly the most vulnerable members of society. The destruction of homes, the loss of livelihoods, the conscription of men, the disruption of social order, and the lasting psychological trauma. These were the realities faced by the peasants, realities that are frequently overlooked in more glamorous accounts of the medieval period. Their stories, often lost to history, need to be remembered and acknowledged, providing a more complete and nuanced understanding of this often misunderstood era. It highlights the profound inequality of medieval society, where the nobility could wage war with relative impunity, while the peasantry suffered the most devastating consequences. Consider, for instance, the impact on the agrarian system. The destruction of crops and the loss of livestock could have a crippling effect on a village's economy, leading to widespread famine and disease. This was not just a temporary setback. It could lead to long-term impoverishment, perpetuating a cycle of poverty that was difficult to break. The loss of skilled laborers, either through death or displacement, further hindered the recovery process. The rebuilding of homes and the restoration of fields required immense effort and resources, and often this happened far too slowly. Furthermore, the disruption of trade routes caused by warfare led to shortages of essential goods, further exacerbating economic hardships. Peasants who relied on markets for the sale of their goods were left without income, leaving them with no means to support themselves and their families. This again contributed to the widespread poverty and instability that characterized the post-war period. It's crucial to remember that the impact of warfare wasn't confined to the battlefield. It reached into every corner of peasant life, influencing everything from the daily grind of agricultural labor to the deeply held beliefs and traditions of the community. The constant threat of violence, the uncertainty of the future, and the ever-present specter of death profoundly shaped their lives, their perceptions, and their understanding of the world. The tapestry of medieval life, while seemingly simple from a distance, was richly woven with threads of hardship, resilience, and the deep scars inflicted by the relentless ravages of war. The peasant's experience stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict, a cost that is often forgotten or minimized in the romanticized narratives of the past. The medieval period was not just about chivalry and courtly love, it was also about survival, resilience, and the enduring spirit of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. The relentless pressure of the Lord's demands and the ever-present shadow of the church weren't the only forces shaping peasant lives. Amidst the backbreaking labor, the constant threat of famine, and the unpredictable fury of nature, a remarkable resilience blossomed, a strength born not of individual heroism, but of collective action and unwavering community spirit. The medieval village wasn't merely a collection of individual households. It was a tightly woven tapestry of interdependence, where survival depended on cooperation and mutual support. Imagine a winter's night, the wind howling outside, the meager fire struggling to banish the chill. Within the cramped confines of a wattle and daub cottage, a family huddled together, their faces etched with worry. A sudden illness, an injury sustained during the harvest, or the loss of a crucial animal could plunge a family into immediate crisis. In this precarious existence, individual resources were often insufficient, and reliance on neighbors became not merely a matter of kindness, but a necessity. The villagers were experts at sharing resources. The annual cycle of agricultural work demanded a degree of coordination unseen in later periods. Sowing, weeding, reaping, these were collective efforts, and the rhythms of the village year were dictated by the shared need to maximize the meager yield of the land. When a family faced a crisis, neighbors were the first line of defense. A sick child might receive care from a more experienced mother. A struggling family might receive assistance with harvesting or receive food provisions from others who were more fortunate. This wasn't merely charity, it was an implicit understanding that today's misfortune could become tomorrow's reality. The villagers were acutely aware of their vulnerability to the vagaries of nature, and they were bound together by the understanding that their survival depended on the strength of their collective. Their community acted as a safety net, cushioning the harsh blows that fate dealt regularly. The social structure of the village itself was structured around this principle. While the Lord held ultimate authority, the village possessed a remarkable degree of autonomy. Village elders, often respected for their wisdom and experience, played a crucial role in resolving disputes, organizing communal tasks, and ensuring the maintenance of social harmony. Their influence was deeply embedded in the social fabric, drawing on the collective experience and wisdom of generations. They understood the delicate balance of the village ecosystem and were keen to maintain this balance. This wasn't a formal system of governance. It was an organic response to the pressures of survival, reflecting a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of human lives. The village church, while under the authority of the wider ecclesiastical structure, also functioned as a critical hub for social life. It wasn't just a place of worship. It served as a community center, a gathering space for celebrations, festivals, and the sharing of news. The priest or rector, often the most literate individual in the village, could also act as a mediator, counselor, and record keeper. His knowledge and influence helped manage disputes and maintain community solidarity. The church, therefore, was not just a spiritual entity, but a vital pillar of the community's social and economic life. Religious festivals were not just moments of spiritual devotion, but also opportunities for social interaction, strengthening the bonds that held the village together. But community resilience wasn't simply about material support. It also involved emotional and psychological support. In a world where life expectancy was short and the threat of illness and death ever present, the capacity to empathize and offer emotional solace was paramount. The sharing of stories, songs, and traditions served to create a sense of shared identity and purpose, reaffirming the bonds that tied them together. Laughter, as a means of releasing tension and fostering resilience, was as important as the physical support provided by neighbors. Their collective resilience was strengthened by their shared experiences and emotional support systems. The role of women in this communal resilience cannot be overlooked. Women played a significant role in the cultivation of crops, the care of livestock, the maintenance of households, and the passing on of knowledge from one generation to another. Their contributions weren't confined to the domestic sphere. They participated fully in the communal life of the village, often holding positions of leadership, offering their knowledge and experience in the day-to-day activities of the community. Their contributions are often underrepresented in historical records. This does not mean they were less important. Their steadfast nature and ability to endure hardship were critical to their community's survival. The capacity for adaptation, a key element of resilience, was also evident in the medieval peasants' lifestyle. They possessed a deep understanding of their environment, exhibiting impressive ingenuity in developing techniques to maximize the yield from the land and mitigate the risks associated with unpredictable weather patterns. This ingenuity extended to the development of innovative tools, the efficient use of resources, and the development of resilient crop varieties. This constant striving for improvement, this relentless seeking of ways to cope with the many challenges they faced, was a testament to the resourcefulness and innovative capacity of the medieval peasantry. This adaptability was not a passive endurance, but an active negotiation with the challenges of survival. The stories of resilience are not always found in grand narratives or dramatic battles. They are often found in the small, everyday acts of kindness, cooperation, and mutual support. They are found in the shared meals, the communal celebrations, the collective efforts in the fields, and the quiet acts of solidarity that helped peasants cope with the hardships of their lives. The peasants' resilience wasn't simply about surviving, it was about thriving amidst adversity, maintaining their humanity, and passing on their values and traditions to the next generation. Consider the seemingly simple act of sharing food during times of scarcity. This wasn't just about physical sustenance, it was an act of solidarity, a reinforcement of the social bonds that held the community together. It was a testament to the villagers' commitment to their neighbors and to their shared destiny. Similarly, the collective response to a crisis, such as a fire or a flood, demonstrated the strength of communal action. Villagers would come together to help rebuild homes, to share resources, and to provide support for those affected, an act that far outweighed any personal investment. The resilience of the medieval peasant wasn't merely a passive acceptance of fate. It was an active engagement with the challenges of life, an ongoing negotiation with the forces that threatened their existence. Their response was not one of submission, but of adaptation, creativity, and solidarity. Their community formed a bedrock of support, providing a buffer against the harsh realities of medieval existence. Their stories, often untold and forgotten, stand as a testament to the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to endure, to adapt, and to find strength and unity even amidst the most dire circumstances. Their collective strength, born of necessity and forged in the crucible of adversity, was the key to their survival. This legacy of resilience stands as a powerful reminder of human potential and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The harsh realities of medieval life did not break them. They shaped their character and fostered a strength of community that should be admired and studied as a testament to human endurance and the extraordinary strength found in human solidarity. Chapter 3: A Year in the Life of a Medieval Village. The first tentative rays of the spring sun, weak after the long winter's slumber, kissed the thawing earth. A thin film of ice still clung to the edges of the village well, but the air hummed with a palpable energy, a promise of renewal that stirred even the most weary hearts. For Thomas and his family, as for everyone in the village of Oakhaven, spring meant one thing: planting. The long winter had been hard. The meager stores of grain had dwindled, and the constant gnawing hunger had been a persistent companion. The livestock, thin and weak, had barely survived on the scant winter fodder. The memory of icy winds whistling through the chinks in the walls of their cottage, the relentless cold seeping into their bones, still lingered. But with the arrival of spring, a tentative optimism bloomed. The earth, softened by the melting snow, whispered of the possibility of a bountiful harvest, a promise of relief from the constant anxieties that gnawed at their souls. The first task was the preparation of the land. This wasn't a solitary undertaking. It was a communal effort, a symphony of coordinated movement orchestrated by generations of experience. Men and women, old and young, worked together, their movements honed by years of practice. The air was filled with the rhythmic thud of shovels striking the earth, the rasping sounds of wooden plows cutting through the stubborn soil, and the cheerful banter that helped ease the physical burden. Thomas, his face weathered and lined, his hands calloused and strong from years of toil, wielded his spade with practiced ease. His wife, Martha, her movements as graceful and efficient as the dance of a seasoned harvester, followed close behind, gathering stones and clearing any lingering debris. Their children, little more than wisps of humanity, helped by carrying water for their parents, their small hands diligently assisting the larger efforts. They understood the importance of this work from their early years, this collective responsibility. They weren't simply planting seeds. They were sowing the seeds of survival, providing for their family and their community. The smell of the freshly turned earth, rich and pungent, hung heavy in the air, mingling with the sweet fragrance of the budding wildflowers that bravely pushed their way through the thawing soil. The air, still carrying the chill of winter, was now alive with the chirping of the birds, their joyous melodies a counterpoint to the rhythmic sounds of labor. The village, usually quiet and somber during the harsh winter months, was transformed into a hive of activity, a tangible demonstration of shared purpose and collective strength. The choice of seeds was a critical decision. The villagers meticulously selected seeds from the previous harvest, carefully setting aside only the strongest and healthiest specimens. These weren't just seeds. They were the embodiment of their hopes, their dreams of a better future. Every seed planted represented a small wager against the uncertainties of nature, a gamble against disease, pests, and the capriciousness of the weather. The selection of the seeds wasn't simply a mechanical process. It was imbued with a deep respect for the natural world and a profound understanding of its rhythms. The old women of the village, keepers of traditional knowledge, examined each seed with an expert eye, discarding the weak and imperfect. Their knowledge, passed down through generations, ensured the selection of the most resilient varieties, those best suited to the vagaries of their unpredictable climate. The process of sowing the seeds itself was a careful and delicate operation. The seeds were not simply flung onto the land, but meticulously placed in the prepared furrows, a testament to the villagers' respect for the fruits of their labor and their deep-seated knowledge of agriculture. This was more than mere agricultural technique. It was a ritual, a symbolic act of faith in the future, a manifestation of hope in a life often defined by scarcity and uncertainty. The planting wasn't completed in a day. It extended over several weeks, a testament to the sheer scale of the work required to cultivate enough food to sustain the village throughout the year. The rhythm of the day was dictated by the relentless demands of the land, the need to maximize every hour of sunlight and make the most of the limited resources available. The sun rose early, and the villagers began their work even before the first rays of light touched the horizon. Each morning they would gather at the edge of the fields, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The weather was a constant source of worry. A sudden frost, an unexpected downpour, or a prolonged drought could easily wipe out their entire harvest, plunging the village into a devastating famine. Their hard work could be undone in a single day. Every seed planted represented a potential loss, as well as a potential gain, and the balance hung precariously. Their prayers for sunshine and rain, their desperate hope for good weather, weren't just religious expressions. They were pragmatic pleas for survival. As the days turned into weeks, the landscape slowly transformed. The barren fields, once stark and lifeless, gradually began to take on a vibrant green hue, a living testament to the villagers' relentless toil. The sight of the emerging shoots, tiny and fragile, brought a surge of joy and relief, a tangible manifestation of hope in the face of constant uncertainty. The fields were not merely plots of land. They were mirrors reflecting the hopes and anxieties of the entire community. Evenings brought a different kind of community engagement. Gathering around the communal fire after a hard day's work, the villagers shared stories, songs, and jokes, their voices mingling with the crackle of the flames. The shared meals, though meager, were occasions for fellowship and camaraderie, a chance to reinforce the bonds that held the village together. These shared moments were as essential to their survival as the food itself, for they nourished not just their bodies, but also their spirits. The collective effort of planting served as a constant reminder of their interdependence, a powerful demonstration of their collective resilience. The success of the harvest, indeed their very survival, depended not on individual achievements, but on the strength of the community. This collective identity was a source of comfort and strength, a bulwark against the uncertainties and hardships of life in the medieval village. As the young sprouts appeared, so did the collective hope of Oakhaven for survival, the hope for sustenance, the hope for community, and the enduring hope for the human spirit to triumph over adversity. The spring planting was more than just a seasonal event. It was a testament to the human spirit's enduring capacity for hope, resilience, and community. The long days of summer stretched before them, a relentless march towards the culmination of their year's labor. The sun, a fiery orb in the cerulean sky, beat down mercilessly, baking the earth and turning the air thick and heavy. Sweat plastered their clothes to their bodies, and the constant ache in their muscles was a familiar companion. Yet, a different kind of energy pulsed through Oakhaven now, one tinged with both anticipation and apprehension. The harvest was at hand. The fields of wheat, once a vibrant green, now rippled like a golden ocean under the summer sun. The stalks, heavy with grain, bowed low under their burden, a testament to the villagers' hard work and the generosity or stinginess of the earth. The air buzzed with the incessant drone of bees, drunk on the nectar of wildflowers that stubbornly clung to the edges of the cultivated land, their sweet fragrance a heady contrast to the earthy scent of the ripening grain. Harvesting was a communal endeavor, even more so than the spring planting. Families worked together, their movements synchronized by years of shared experience. The rhythmic swish of sickles cutting through the stalks filled the air, punctuated by the occasional sharp crack as a stalk snapped under the weight of the grain. Children, too small to wield the sickles effectively, scampered through the fields, gathering stray stalks and helping to bind the sheaves. Their laughter, high-pitched and joyous, mingled with the murmur of adult conversation and the creak of wooden carts slowly making their way across the uneven terrain. The work was backbreaking, relentless, and unforgiving. The sun's relentless glare reflected off the parched earth, adding to the physical strain. Hands blistered and ached, backs cramped, and throats burned with thirst. Yet, the villagers persevered, driven by the knowledge that their very survival depended on the success of this harvest. Each sheaf represented sustenance for the long winter months ahead, a buffer against the biting cold and the gnawing hunger. A good harvest meant a warm, well-fed winter. A bad harvest, the chilling specter of famine. This was not a romantic ideal. This was the harsh reality of medieval life. The sensory experience was overwhelming. The golden waves of wheat stretched to the horizon, a breathtaking spectacle that momentarily distracted from the aching muscles and parched throats. The air, heavy with the scent of ripening grain, mingled with the sweet fragrance of wildflowers and the earthy smell of the freshly turned soil. The taste of sweat mingled with the anticipation of the harvest's reward. The sound of laughter and conversation were a constant backdrop to the rhythmic swish of sickles, the creak of carts, and the occasional cry of a child who had stumbled or scraped a knee. But the beauty of the golden fields was not without its anxieties. The weather remained a constant source of worry. A sudden hailstorm could lay waste to the entire harvest in a matter of minutes, turning the fields from a sea of gold to a landscape of devastation. A prolonged dry spell could shrivel the grain, reducing the yield to a mere fraction of what it should have been. The villagers, seasoned by years of facing such uncertainties, watched the skies with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Their prayers were not mere religious rituals. They were urgent pleas to a fickle nature, a desperate hope for a benevolent sky. Their livelihood depended on its mercy. As the harvest progressed, the village transformed into a hub of activity. The communal threshing floor became a whirlwind of activity, men and women working in unison, separating the grain from the stalks. The air thrummed with the rhythmic thud of flails, the rasping sound of chaff being winnowed, and the excited chatter of villagers celebrating their collective accomplishment. The children, energized by the bounty of the harvest, played amidst the piles of grain, their laughter echoing through the village. But the success of the harvest was not uniform across the village. Some families, blessed with particularly fertile land or exceptionally diligent workers, boasted overflowing granaries. Their faces, usually etched with worry, now radiated a sense of relief and even joy. Their winter would be warm and abundant. Others, less fortunate, found their harvests meager, barely enough to sustain their families through the winter months. Their faces reflected a weary resignation, a quiet acceptance of a harsh reality. The harvest, while a celebration for some, was a stark reminder of inequality and the constant struggle for survival for others. The success of the harvest also had implications beyond individual families. The lord of the manor, whose power and wealth were inextricably linked to the productivity of his lands, would collect his share of the harvest, a levy that could leave some villagers with a bare minimum to see them through the winter. The size of this share dictated the difference between a comfortable winter and a perilous struggle against starvation. This was the harsh reality of feudalism, a system that often exacerbated the inequalities born of nature's capriciousness. Evenings during harvest time were filled with a palpable sense of relief or apprehension, mirroring the day's results. The communal fire crackled brightly, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the village hall. The shared meals, more bountiful than usual, were occasions for celebration or quiet resignation, depending on the household. Laughter mingled with anxious whispers about the coming winter, a reminder that the harvest, while a pivotal event, was not a guarantee of security. The success of the harvest was not merely a testament to their hard work, but a fragile lifeline, the measure of their collective survival. The unpredictability of the harvest, the constant risk of failure, was deeply embedded in the fabric of medieval peasant life. It wasn't a mere economic reality. It shaped their worldview, their social interactions, and their spiritual beliefs. The harvest was a time of both intense work and intense anxiety, a period that showcased the resilience of the human spirit in the face of uncertainty. The success or failure of the harvest wasn't simply a matter of agricultural technique. It was a reflection of their relationship with nature, their community, and their place in the feudal order. It was a story of hope and hardship, plenty and scarcity, a microcosm of their lives. The harvest was over, but the anxieties of winter still lingered, a persistent reminder of the precarious balance between survival and starvation. The last golden sheaves were stacked high in the barns, their weight a tangible representation of the village's success, or lack thereof. The air, once thick with the scent of ripening grain, now carried the crisp, cool breath of autumn. A palpable shift in the atmosphere settled over Oakhaven, a shift from the frenetic energy of harvest to the methodical, almost somber preparations for winter's icy grip. The days were shortening, the sun dipping below the horizon earlier each evening, casting long, skeletal shadows across the fields. The vibrant greens and golds of summer were fading, replaced by a palette of russets, browns, and the deep crimson of dying leaves. The first task was the gathering of firewood. This wasn't merely a matter of collecting fallen branches. It was a significant undertaking, a crucial element of survival. Entire families ventured into the surrounding woods, their axes ringing through the thinning canopy. The air hummed with the rhythmic thud of steel on wood, the sharp crack of splitting logs, and the hushed conversations exchanged between generations. The youngest children, too small to wield axes, collected smaller twigs and kindling, their small hands bundled against the increasingly chill air. The women, adept at identifying the best wood for burning and recognizing the telltale signs of rot, meticulously sorted and stacked the gathered wood, ensuring a supply that would last through the coldest months. The men, their strength honed by years of backbreaking labor, felled larger trees, their skill and precision ensuring both ample fuel and the safety of those around them. The process was not without its challenges. The woods held their own dangers, hidden hollows, thorny bushes, and the ever-present risk of injury from swinging axes. Stories whispered around crackling hearths recounted close calls and accidents, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their existence. Yet, despite the risks, the villagers worked tirelessly, driven by the primal instinct for survival. The success of their preparations would determine the difference between a tolerable winter and a harrowing struggle against the elements. The pile of wood grew larger day by day, a reassuring bulwark against the approaching cold, a physical manifestation of their communal effort. Parallel to the wood gathering, the crucial task of food preservation commenced. The bounty of the harvest, though significant, was finite. The villagers understood this implicitly. They knew that the survival of their families rested on their ability to preserve the fruits of their labor, transforming summer's abundance into sustenance for the lean winter months. This was a complex process, demanding knowledge, skill, and a deep understanding of the natural world. Meat preservation was a crucial aspect of this process. Salting was a common method, allowing for the long-term storage of meat. The villagers meticulously cleaned and butchered the animals raised during the year: pigs, sheep, and cattle. Each cut was carefully salted, then packed in barrels, its preservation a critical act that ensured the continued sustenance of the village community. Other techniques involved smoking meat to preserve it and add flavor, a method often used for smaller game animals. The smoking process relied on precise control of temperature and the judicious use of various woods, a mastery that was passed down through generations. The preservation of vegetables was equally important. The abundance of the harvest extended beyond grains to an assortment of root vegetables, turnips, carrots, parsnips, and others. These were carefully cleaned, stored in cool, dark cellars, or preserved through methods such as pickling, a process that involved submerging them in brine or vinegar, ensuring their long-term consumption. Other vegetables were dried, hung in well-ventilated spaces to lose moisture and extend their shelf life. Fruits, such as apples and pears, were also dried or preserved through fermentation to produce cider, a potent source of nutrition and essential calories during the lean winter months. The preservation of grains was central to survival. The harvested wheat, rye, barley, or oats were meticulously threshed, separating the grain from the stalks. The grain was then cleaned, winnowed, and stored in large chests or bins to protect it from pests and moisture. Some surplus grains were ground into flour, while others were stored whole to be used later in various forms. The success of this preservation process ensured the village's survival throughout the harsh winter ahead, serving as a barrier against starvation and cold. Beyond the preservation of food, the villagers also focused on maintaining their homes, repairing roofs and walls, ensuring they could withstand the fierce winter winds and blizzards. Thatch roofs were mended, and walls were reinforced, turning the humble dwellings into robust shelters against the elements. Windows were sealed with animal skins or carefully applied mud to minimize drafts, transforming their homes into warm and secure spaces for the long winter months. The focus was on creating a microclimate within their homes to mitigate the cold of the outside world. The tasks were never-ending, a relentless pursuit of readiness. The chill in the air only intensified the sense of urgency. Each completed task was a small victory, a reassuring step toward ensuring survival. Evenings were filled with the sounds of hammers ringing, axes sharpening, and the constant murmur of people working together. The communal effort was tangible, the villagers supporting each other, sharing skills and resources, a testament to the strength of their community and their collective dedication to preserving their livelihood. The shared meals were humble, but the spirit of camaraderie and mutual support permeated the atmosphere, fostering a sense of unity and resilience that was essential for navigating the challenges of winter. The approach of winter was not met with fear, but with a quiet determination, a resolute acceptance of the challenges ahead. This wasn't simply about survival, it was about maintaining their community, preserving their traditions, and ensuring the continuation of their lives within Oak Haven. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, a sense of anticipation and resolve held sway over the village, a spirit that transcended the hardships of their lives and spoke to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The hard work of autumn was a testament to the power of collective effort in the face of adversity, a silent but powerful narrative of survival in a world where the lines between survival and starvation were often thin. Winter's approach was imminent, but Oak Haven, with its meticulously gathered wood, preserved food, and resilient spirit, stood ready. The first snowfall arrived like a silent thief, blanketing Oak Haven in a pristine layer of white. The transformation was swift and dramatic. The familiar landscape, already muted in its autumnal hues, was now rendered in a monochromatic beauty, deceptively peaceful. But beneath the serene facade lurked the stark realities of winter's harsh grip. The days, already short, became even shorter, the sun a pale, weak disk in the perpetually gray sky. Darkness descended early, swallowing the village in a long, cold embrace. The initial excitement of the first snow, evident in the children's joyful shrieks as they tumbled in the soft powder, quickly faded. The novelty yielded to the chilling awareness of scarcity. Food, meticulously preserved through the autumn, was now measured with a frugality bordering on miserliness. Each morsel was precious, each meal a carefully calculated equation of calories and survival. The once abundant stores, painstakingly built up through months of toil, were now dwindling with each passing day, a tangible representation of the relentless march of winter. The warmth of the hearths became even more crucial. Families huddled together, their bodies pressing close, seeking warmth from the crackling flames. The air within the homes, thick with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stew, was a stark contrast to the biting chill that permeated every nook and cranny of the outside world. But even the warmth of the hearths was not enough to completely banish the cold. Fingers and toes numbed despite the proximity to the fire, and the ever-present threat of hypothermia hung heavy in the air, a silent specter lurking at the edge of their awareness. Illness became another unwelcome visitor during the winter months. The dampness and cold, coupled with the limited and repetitive diet, made the villagers vulnerable to a range of ailments. Coughs and fevers were commonplace, spreading rapidly through the close-knit community. Simple infections, easily treatable in milder seasons, could prove deadly in the harsh winter. The village healer Ilara, a woman revered for her herbal remedies and traditional knowledge, was constantly in demand, her skills and compassion being the only bulwark against the ravages of illness. Her remedies were simple: herbal teas, poultices made from local plants, and comforting words that offered hope amid the pervasive anxieties. The lack of fresh food was a constant concern. The preserved vegetables, though carefully stored, began to show their age. The once vibrant turnips and carrots were now shriveled and less palatable. The salted meats, a crucial source of protein, lost some of their flavor and texture. The cider, initially a welcome treat, became increasingly acidic with time. The village's diet became monotonous, a cycle of repetitive meals offering little variety or nourishment. The children, particularly vulnerable, grew thin and pale, their energy levels visibly dwindling. The adults, stoic and hardened by years of hardship, bore the brunt of the situation without complaint, their resilience a testament to their survival instincts. Even the most mundane tasks became laborious and challenging. The simple act of drawing water from the well involved chipping away at the ice that formed on its surface, a slow and arduous process that required considerable effort. Traveling between houses was a risky endeavor. The snow, often several feet deep, hampered movement, making even short journeys an exhausting undertaking. The livestock, too, suffered the effects of the winter. Keeping them fed and healthy required extra effort, as foraging for food in the snow-covered fields became increasingly difficult. Animals weakened by cold and hunger became susceptible to disease, increasing the anxiety surrounding food supply. But within the grim landscape of winter's hardships lay a remarkable resilience. The community of Oakhaven, bound together by shared adversity, strengthened its bonds. Neighbors helped neighbors, sharing food, offering shelter, and providing emotional support. The villagers' spirit of solidarity shone brightly amid the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. Shared meals, though meager, were occasions for laughter and stories, providing a temporary respite from the harsh realities of their existence. The children, despite their hardships, found joy in simple games, their laughter echoing through the snow-covered village. The elders, repositories of wisdom and experience, imparted their knowledge to the younger generations, ensuring the survival of traditions and skills crucial to their way of life. Despite the difficulties of winter, the villagers found ways to find entertainment and relief. The evenings were often filled with storytelling, songs, and simple games, providing a welcome distraction from the cold and the ever-present worry about food. The sharing of stories and folktales created a sense of unity and preserved their cultural heritage, providing a connection to their past and a hope for the future. The harsh conditions were not merely a challenge to their survival. They were a test of their endurance and a crucible for forging stronger bonds within their community. The bleakness of winter served as a reminder of the preciousness of human connection and resilience. The long winter nights were filled with anxieties, but they also offered an opportunity for reflection. As the villagers sat huddled around their hearths, they contemplated the past year, its triumphs and failures. They planned for the future, making preparations for the next planting season. They strengthened their faith and held on to the hope of a brighter spring. The arrival of spring was not merely a seasonal change. It was a symbol of renewal and hope, a promise of abundance after the hardships of winter. It was the ultimate reward for their resilience and the testament to their endurance, the culmination of their hard work and communal spirit. The winter's darkness served only to enhance the brightness of the eventual return to life. The enduring cold and darkness was therefore not a defeat, but a trial that tested their fortitude and deepened their community spirit. It was an integral part of their lives, a necessary passage that strengthened their resolve and underscored their indomitable will to survive. And as the days slowly began to lengthen, a silent hope, as steady as the rising sun, began to dawn in Oakhaven. The last embers of the fire died down, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the village elder's cottage. Old Man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of sun and hardship, stirred the remaining ashes with a long, gnarled finger. Outside, the wind howled a mournful tune, a fitting soundtrack to the quiet contemplation settling over the village of Oakhaven. The year was drawing to a close, a year that had tested the very limits of their endurance. It had been a year of relentless toil, a cycle of sowing and reaping that mirrored the endless rhythm of life and death itself. The spring planting, fraught with the anxiety of unpredictable weather and the ever-present threat of crop failure, had yielded a moderate harvest, sufficient perhaps, but not abundant. The summer months, though filled with the backbreaking labor of tending the fields, had offered moments of respite, punctuated by the laughter of children playing in the meadows and the occasional feast celebrating a successful hunt. Autumn, with its rich bounty, had been a time of frantic activity, of preserving the harvest for the long, lean months ahead. And now, winter held them captive, its icy grip a stark reminder of the precariousness of their existence. But the winter, despite its harsh realities, was also a time for reflection. It was a period for stock-taking, not just of material goods, but also of the emotional landscape of the community. The village, huddled together against the cold, became a microcosm of the human spirit's remarkable capacity to endure. The women, their hands chapped and raw from the endless cycle of washing and mending, shared stories and recipes, their voices a comforting hum in the long, dark evenings. The men, their bodies weary from the ceaseless labor in the fields, gathered in the dimly lit tavern, their gruff voices softening as they swapped tales of hunts, harvests, and past winters. Even the children, despite the cold and the monotony of their lives, found solace in simple games and shared dreams, their laughter a fragile yet potent antidote to the pervasive gloom. The year had taken its toll. Several villagers had succumbed to illness, their lives extinguished like candles in a sudden gust of wind. Others had fallen victim to accidents, their stories ending as abruptly as a snapped twig underfoot. These losses were mourned deeply, their absence a stark reminder of life's fragility. Yet, the community's response was not one of despair but of quiet acceptance, a stoic acknowledgement of the cyclical nature of life and death. They buried their dead with simple rituals, their prayers a mixture of sorrow and hope, their faith an anchor in the sea of uncertainty. The memories of the year's events were not merely a collection of hardships. The birth of several babies brought renewed joy and hope. The success of a local craftsman in creating a particularly sturdy plow, which improved their farming technique, was a cause for communal celebration. The unexpected return of a young man who had gone off to war, seemingly unscathed, was a source of jubilation. These moments of joy, however fleeting, offered a much-needed contrast to the harsh realities of daily life, a reminder that even in the midst of adversity, life could offer unexpected blessings. The cycle of the year, so closely tied to the cycle of their lives, had taught them valuable lessons. It had reinforced the importance of community, the strength found in shared adversity. It had demonstrated the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to find joy and hope even in the face of unrelenting hardship. The villagers had learned to appreciate the small blessings, the warmth of the hearth, the taste of a simple meal shared with loved ones, the comfort of human connection. As the days began to lengthen, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of Oakhaven. The long, dark nights yielded to shorter, brighter ones. The snow began to melt, revealing the promise of a new spring. The villagers felt the stirrings of anticipation, a collective yearning for the renewal that the changing seasons offered. The seeds they had carefully preserved were ready for planting. Their tools were being sharpened. Their spirits, though weary, were far from broken. They carried within them the weight of the past year, its successes and failures etched onto their souls. But their eyes looked towards the future with a quiet, determined hope. The coming year would undoubtedly present its own set of challenges. The weather could prove unkind, illness could strike again, famine could always be a threat. But the villagers of Oakhaven were ready. They had faced adversity before, and they would face it again. Their resilience, forged in the crucible of hardship, was their greatest asset. Their unity, a testament to their spirit, was their strongest weapon. They understood the relentless rhythm of life and death, the endless cycle of sowing and reaping, of winter's harsh embrace and spring's gentle awakening. They had learned to accept the inevitable, to find hope in the midst of despair, and to draw strength from their communal spirit. The new year, though unknown, held the promise of new beginnings, of renewed hope, of the endless continuation of life's relentless dance. The rhythm of life continued, as steady and predictable as the turning of the seasons, a dance between hardship and hope, between winter's slumber and spring's awakening. And in the heart of Oakhaven, a quiet strength, born of shared experience and forged in the fires of adversity, remained a constant. The cycle of life in all its brutality and beauty continued, and the people of Oakhaven, steadfast in their resilience, were ready to meet it. The silence of the winter nights had yielded to the whispers of spring, carrying with it the promise of a new beginning, a new cycle, and the enduring human spirit's ability to endure and ultimately to flourish. The cycle of life, in its cyclical and predictable fashion, would continue, and as the first tentative shoots of green poked their heads through the thawing earth, a silent promise of renewal hung in the crisp, clean air. A silent hope, as steadfast and enduring as the village itself, filled the hearts of the villagers of Oakhaven.